Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Next up. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 12B, zoning bylaw amendment application Z1809 for 316 King Street North, Milestone Developments, Inc. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future time. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of council chambers. There is more than one registry, so please make sure you sign the appropriate one. The planner, Laura Dewar, will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Laura.
Good evening, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, and the public here tonight. For this informal public meeting, I'll give a brief overview of zoning bylaw amendment Z1809. So the zoning bylaw amendment application is for the lands at 316 King Street North. They're located on the east side of King Street between Hickory and Columbia Street. After road widenings, it's about 0.26 hectares in size. So the site contains an existing 10-story apartment building and surface parking to the north and south, and I've just identified the property here in red. The building was completed and occupied in 2007, and the lands are surrounded by other residential developments. So high-rise to the west, sort of mid-rise to the east, and there's also a few converted single detached dwellings nearby. So this is a street view perspective of what the owner is proposing to do with the site, which is to renovate the existing building, which is the central building here, by converting the 25 5-bedroom units to 50 2-bedroom units, and also adding a ground floor street-facing commercial unit that doesn't exist today. They would also like to add a 1-story parking structure to the south facade of the existing 10-story building, adding a ground floor street-facing commercial unit at the front of that parking deck. Lastly, they'd like to construct a new freestanding 15-story mixed-use building on the vacant portion of the site directly north of the existing 10-story building. And that new building would contain 80 units, all 2 bedrooms, or that's what we know, that's what the proposal is so far, with a ground floor street-facing commercial unit. So overall, the development would contain 130 units, 260 bedrooms, about 2,000 square feet of commercial floor area, and 86 parking spaces. And this is just a rear perspective of the proposed development that the architect has prepared. This is a conceptual site plan of the development that was submitted with the application. You can see this is the footprint of the existing 10-story building, and then there's sort of footprint of the new 15-story building, and the parking deck is in this location. This plan shows the upper parking deck to the southeast of the existing building. It's accessed by a car lift, which is something we haven't seen yet, I don't believe, in Waterloo, in this location here. And this is a below-grade parking plan that shows sort of the underground parking level, and I believe that this level would also be accessed by that car lift. The lands are currently designated in the official plan mixed-use, high-density residential. The maximum height and density contemplated is 750 beds per hectare and 81 meters in height. That existing building was built under the former official plan policy framework. The current zoning is multiple residence 25, which permits 250 units per hectare, 75 meters and 25 stories in height. So again, the two don't quite align. So they're requesting that the MR25 zone continue to apply to the lands with a number of performance regulations being amended to suit this development. and I'll just list them here. So the first is changing the measure of density from units per hectare to bedrooms per hectare, which is very common in these applications. They want to increase the maximum density to 987 bedrooms per hectare through the density bonusing provisions in the official plan. That would be to allow an additional 63 bedrooms above that maximum that the official plan would contemplate. So to do this, they would need to undertake an uplift appraisal that would determine the additional value gained by these additional bedrooms. Staff will be considering the community benefits that are offered in exchange for the additional bedrooms and also the appropriateness of the density increase requested. They're also proposing to introduce a range of ancillary commercial uses, making this a mixed-use development. They're requesting to reduce the residential parking rate from 1 space per unit to 0.66 spaces per unit. They'd like to introduce a commercial parking requirement. Commercial uses aren't permitted today. There's no commercial parking requirement, so they want to introduce a rate of 2 spaces per 100 square meters, but this is really, they also would like those commercial spaces to be shared with the some of the residential spaces. They'd like to reduce the surface parking requirement from 10% to 5.4%, reduce the loading space dimension requirements, and they'd like to allow a parking lift or elevator to be permitted in lieu of a driveway to access the parking, quite a few of the parking spaces. They would like to reduce the landscape open space requirement from 30%, which is required at grade, to 15% at grade, with 5% above grade, I believe in the form of a terrace. And lastly, they'd like to reduce building setbacks. So in the front yard, they'd like to reduce it from 5 to 4 meters in this location here and here. In the southerly side yard, the requirement is 3 meters. They'd like to reduce that for the parking deck to 1 meter. And in the rear yard, which is sort of extending in this location across this portion of the back of the parking deck and across a portion of the back of the new residential mixed-use building, from 7.5 meters to 1.5 meters. Sorry, 1.5 here, 3.3 in this location. So the application was circulated to staff and agencies in early May. After tonight's informal, we'll work to prepare a summary of all the comments, provide them to the applicant and their consulting team, work through a number of the issues, including clarifying what the density bonusing package is that's being offered here. And staff will ultimately prepare a staff report and recommendations for council to consider at a future formal public meeting. Thank you.
Does any council have any questions for staff? Please remember this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked at this point. Councilors should not express opinions at this point. Questions of staff. Councilor Durrell first.
Do you want to go first, Councilor Riley? Your hands up first. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions. The first one is actually more of sort of a big thinking one, which, I mean, that this is one of the black eyes we have in our planning, the city planning, that area along King Street from the University to Columbia. And so how do we make it not feel like a cavern along there? And this is, I know we're supposed to be talking about this piece in particular. So in your urban planning and your planning experience, how is there enough width on King Street to not make it feel claustrophobic? It looks like they're doing one less meter on King Street.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question through you, Mayor
Setbacks.
Jaworski.
That's what we do in Uptown, is we set it back. Are there? I didn't see setbacks or like the. Mm-hmm. What's it called when you do this?
A step back.
Podium.
Yeah, a podium and tower design.
Is that on here? I didn't.
It's. I mean, I think that we have an urban design manual that is intended to guide design and good urban design in the city. But we've learned certain things about this particular part of the city, and we know that it can be very windy and it can have that tunneling effect. So certainly I think we'll be looking very closely at how design can be done a little bit differently to mitigate wind without just sort of repeating some of the classic design approaches that we've used in the past. So we do have to, I think, we've learned a lot from this space, and I think we probably do need to take a slightly different approach to the new buildings on this site.
If I could just follow up with that, I mean, one of the things is they're kind of lined up. And when I look at this, it's exactly where it's starting to happen on the other side now. Are the two buildings almost exactly side by side?
Oh, it's,
Yeah. So this is King
I
Street?
would say there is general alignment. I think we want to balance having a consistent streetscape, which we can achieve by a consistent setback, with making the buildings interesting and attractive to the people that live in the buildings and the people that are walking by them as well. So.
Two more questions, if I could. So this is obviously a very pedestrian area. A lot of people, I mean, there's always someone on the sidewalk walking here. So what is the pedestrian experience then for this proposal?
Well, one thing that's different is the mixed use element. This is something new to this part of King Street. So it should, I think the intent here is to activate the street in a different way that we don't currently see in this area, because right now the zoning doesn't permit commercial along this stretch of King Street, but the official plan framework does contemplate it. So really that's what's new and different here, I think, and that opportunity to activate the street in a different way.
And then finally, I was just in New York City, and they have these car elevators everywhere, and there's massive amounts of cars lined up to get into these elevators. So how does that work? Do you know yet?
I would like to let the applicant's consultant speak a little bit further to the philosophy behind this design, and I think their thinking is that it's space sufficient, but I don't know enough about the queuing that happens here, and I think they might shed some light on that particular point.
Thank you, Councillor Joel. Councillor Whaley, did you have questions at this time?
Some questions, Mayor. Several, in fact.
Okay.
When this building was built in the early 2000s, the urban design manual was more of a suggestion than a standard. And as Councillor Joel suggested, this particular building was one that was on the minds of a lot of citizens when they think about some of the mistakes that were made back then, that gave some teeth to the new urban design guideline. In this case, the building itself is 9 stories out of 10 made of stucco. And so when I hear tonight the opportunity to revitalize that building, there's a lot to be hopeful for. The fact that there's going to be mixed use, even though it's, when you're talking about 1 meter separation between a two deck parking garage from the neighbor. I'm not allowed to talk about it being shoehorned in there, but it sure is. But the renovation offers hope for the future, and my question is, because the urban design guidelines, will we see all these renovations reflected in the new urban design guidelines, or will we not? That's question number one.
In the document, the manual that we have today?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. I know, I understand that we're still, yeah, maybe I'll defer that to
Mr.
Joel.
Cotter has further information.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Whaley. The proposed redevelopment of the existing building as well as the new buildings are subject to site plan control. So the expectation would be that the new buildings and the retrofits of the existing building would comply with our current urban design manual.
Isn't that wonderful to hear? That's a question. The other question relates to the density bonusing, because when you take a look at the sight lines here and the narrow the squeezing in of lots of buildings on a small site, it raises the questions of density bonusing. And has there been anything brought forward that you know of, what the applicant's thinking about with respect to what that bonusing will look like in terms of community benefit?
There have been a number of ideas put forward, but I hate to do this, but I would like to have the applicant's consultant explain what it is they may consider bringing forward as a benefit.
Further questions, Councillor Whaley? Okay. I'm going to take a shot at a few and then I'll go to the other councillors. In your presentation, I mentioned the density was requested as like 987 bedrooms per hectare, but I don't know how many hectares it is. How many net new bedrooms is requested?
63.
63. And this would go through the density bonusing process you mentioned in your presentation. That's our new one?
That is correct.
Okay. Parking elevator. How will we assess that? I think of things like Waterloo Fire Rescue and things like that. It's just something we haven't had in our community before. I'm just wondering how we assess it, not just from a planning standpoint, but maybe there's other viewpoints as well.
It's challenging because it's sort of precedent setting. We haven't seen one. I think we have to look at how they function in other communities, some of the maybe challenges that other municipalities may or may not have with these types of facilities. So learning from others, and I think that you've already mentioned, from an engineering perspective, from a safety perspective, are there things things we need to think about before we permit this? Because permitting this may mean permitting more of them in Waterloo. So,
absolutely. And my next one I think is more appropriate for the applicant. So, thank you. Further questions, Councillor Vita Burke? Seeing none, we're good. Thank you very much, Laura. I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward. First up, I have Obi Mujawaz, Milestone Developments, but also have Trevor Hawkins there, and I'll let you guys determine which order you come in. Welcome, Obi.
Mayor Jaworski, members of council, members of the public, thank you for your time on a beautiful Monday. I'm just here to give a quick overview, and I'm going to leave the meat of the discussion for Trevor, my planner. So I'm Obi Mujawaz. I'm managing director and partner in Milestone Developments, Inc. We've done many developments, mainly in Mississauga and Oakville. And when we saw this particular piece of property, we were really interested in it because of the fact that you mentioned, Councillor, it is an eyesore. You're right. It is an eyesore, and it is on the main street and one of the heaviest traffic in the city on King Street. And we're here to improve that. And Councillor, you're also right with your comment about this was a mistake. This building, when it was built, it was the first building with 5 bedrooms, and it was the first to set that precedence of the 5-bedroom units, taking advantage of the unit limitation with no bedroom limitation. And that's why we're here. We're here to correct that. I also want to mention, which is a very important note as well, that the second building that wasn't built yet, that hasn't been built yet, the 15-story building, was pre-approved as a 40-unit building, 5 bedrooms each, and permits were issued, and it was pre-approved and everything. when we took over the site, we decided not to go ahead with that because we didn't want to further damage the eyesore and that mistake. Actually, what we've done was we've reduced the number of bedrooms by 63 units. Yes, we are asking for an additional 63 from the current new bylaw, but we have reduced the number of units by 63, which is 20% from the proposed and already accepted in the past submission. So the past was 40 times 5 for the new building, which is 200 units, plus the current building, 123 existing bedrooms. That is a total of 323 bedrooms. With our proposed renovation, that reduces the first building, the bedroom count, because we have to cut the 5-bedroom units, make them into 2 bedrooms. We're going to automatically lose a bedroom. And the first building, we will reduce the number of bedrooms by 23. And the second building, we will reduce them by 40. A total of 63 units and 20% reduction of the already approved plans. Also, we've changed the whole layout because the current layout is let's just say that if I had to do it all over again, I would definitely not do it the way it was done. And that's what we're doing right now. We are working on that to make sure that this is no longer an eyesore, to remove this mistake from the city. And my whole team, the planners, the architects, the lawyers, every single person that's involved in this project, the first thing I instruct them is this is a joint venture with the city. And this is the way that our mindset is. Every single step, every single decision we take, we have that in mind. Our mindset is we want to work closely with the city to improve this property and make sure that this is a win-win for everyone, a win-win, triple win. Win for the city, win for the community, and win for us. And we want something to be proud of as well once we're done. So I just want to, before I conclude, I just want to stress the fact that and I want to display also that we have been working with the city. It's not just words that I'm saying. Since the pre-consultation meeting, we did take all the planning recommendations from the city, and we put pen to paper, and we've addressed them, and we are continuing to do that. So we're looking forward to working with the city and the community to make sure that we do the best project out there. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Obi. Questions from council? I see Councilor Whaley up first.
Mr. Majawaz, the citizens of Waterloo are really tired of ugly buildings. And if you can take this most ugly of ducklings of a building and turn it into a swan, as you promise, you will be celebrated for your efforts. Celebrated.
Thank you. I look forward to that.
It could result in a renaissance of other buildings who we went through that 5-bedroom era and it didn't work for us. And if you could come up with a new paradigm for beauty and for utility, this community will be greatly in your debt.
Well, thank you very much. And we are working towards that. And this is not just words I'm saying. This is something that we will actually implement 100%. This is going to be a condominium building. This is a building that we're going to be selling unit per unit. So if we don't take these comments into consideration, this is a lost project. This is not a project that's going to work. So we are taking these comments seriously. We are working really hard to make sure that we do the best product out there so we can sell it as well. We need to sell those units individually. Each one of these units has to be sold to a different person. If it's not something that's appealing, nobody's going to buy it. And we want to make sure that's appealing. And this is going to also improve the community as well. So as it stands, It's a 5-bedroom unit. Nobody's going to be interested in this building at the moment except for students. The way that we are building it is going to cater to anybody. Students, if a father and the parents, a father and the mother want to buy a unit for their kids in school, they can go ahead and do that. If a family wants to buy a unit there, they can do that. This will be a condominium building with that stigma removed. And I think it's actually funny that this building will be the first to be converted from the 5-bedroom, and it was the first to be built, a purpose-built, a 5-bedroom. So it's actually, it has a nice ring to it, I think.
Thank you. Further questions from council? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next up is Trevor Hawkins. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. We have a couple of renderings on the image here, but I'll go through those in more detail on subsequent slides. As Ms. Dewar indicated, the property is on King Street, and we can see a number of the buildings that Councillor Whaley and Councillor Durrell were referring to along the King Street corridor as we go all the way up to Columbia Street. And looking south towards Hickory, there are a number of buildings that were built in the 2008 to 2010 to get those buildings in before the urban design guidelines were approved. This building is on the opposite side of the street, where there hasn't been nearly as much redevelopment. It is outside of Northdale, whereas those buildings are inside Northdale. But Laura didn't quite capture, there are a number of high-rise buildings on the other side behind this property on Regina Street as well. Some of them are substantial in size, both height and width. This is similar looking south towards University Avenue. We can see the Regina buildings that line up all the way down to University, and then the King Street buildings, and then Sage 2, which has of course since been constructed, and a number of other buildings that are probably not reflected in this image that have been built along Spruce Street as well. Here are some of the images of that stretch of King Street so that council can remind themselves if they needed to as to what it looks like. So here I am standing close to the McDonald's looking south along King Street with the buildings on the west side of the street, fairly flat with minimal articulation in the building facade along King Street. They do have some canopies to let everyone know where they have to enter the building, but in most other ways they're not really exhibiting high levels of design. Here I am standing on Hickory Street looking north so we can see the south side of the existing 10-story building. So fairly Eaves design, stucco design with punched windows, which we would see if we looked at the other sides of those buildings as well. This is the north side of the building, and I wanted to show this image to give council a sense of what's there today. There is surface parking that surrounds this property at the front, or at the north side, at the rear, and then again in this image at the south side. So effectively you have a building that's surrounded by surface parking with a little bit of perimeter landscaping which has largely been fenced off around the parking area. Laura did let council know what the designations are. I just wanted to show council the mapping just to get a sense. We have the official plan on the left, so this property mixed use high density residential. So the highest designation. The point of this map is to show council that everything around this property is designated for 81 meters. Some of it's mixed use, residential commercial, and some of it as we get closer to University Avenue or to Columbia Street is commercial, but they all permit the same height and the same density if you were to build residential. And then on the right hand side we have the current zoning, and as you can see the MR25 zone applies to not only this property but all the properties as we head north towards the McDonald's on Columbia, but also all the properties behind this that front onto Regina Street. And then across the street we have the Northdale neighborhood and its unique zoning. So everything around it is planned for and zoned for high density. As Obi indicated, this project actually did go through the site plan process for both buildings. Only one of them ended up being built, but the second building was designed and it was approved at 325 beds. They ended up building 2 4-bedroom units in the 10-story building, which is why OB referred to 323. But as you can see, the density was just under the 250, which was allowed in the MR25 zoning, but the resulting bedroom density was over 1,200 bedrooms per hectare. Since that time, council's approved a new official plan. New owner has bought the property and they have a different vision. So part of that vision is to renovate the existing 10-story building and shift away from the 5-bedroom model, which I'm sure council would be supportive of, as well as develop a new 15-story building that's different than the building that was originally proposed, both in terms of what it would look like inside the building, but also what it would look like outside. The commercial space, so the existing, the previously approved project had no commercial space in either building. This project will have commercial space retrofitted into the existing building. It will have commercial space in the new building, and it will have commercial space in the ground floor of the parking structure. There aren't any other buildings along that stretch of Columbia, residential buildings, that have main floor active commercial spaces. In fact, many of those buildings, other than the lobby, have no active spaces whatsoever. So the revised plan, as you renovate the building and as you design a new 15-story building, results in a reduction in bedrooms. So we actually go, even though in the official plan we're asking for density bonusing, in terms of the previous approved plan to what we're presenting to council tonight, we're actually reducing the number of bedrooms. So the 987 does look like a big number when you look at it outside of that perspective, but when you factor in the effort to redesign the building and redesign the previously approved project, perhaps that gives council a little bit different perspective on the reasons why we're asking for the bonusing. Some renderings prepared by Masri O's office, and Rima Masri is here herself if council had any specific questions about the design of the site. It will have a shared parking, so there will be underground parking underneath the entire development. It will also have that above ground parking in the structure, and then there'll be parking underneath that deck. So a combination of uncovered, underground, and covered parking to make the most efficient use of the site as we can. And one of the things that we had to contend with when we were developing this property is the positioning of that 10-story building where it is. You don't have a lot of flexibility in where you can build the second building. There's only room to the north or room to the south, and there's more room to the north than there is to the south, and that was where the building was originally intended to go, and that's where we've decided to position this building. But as council can see from this rendering, it's considerably narrower in terms of it's more of a point tower design. If you compare the look of this building to the width of the buildings I showed in the earlier pictures, which some of those buildings are 50, 60 meters wide, this is 18 meters wide, so it's a third the size of many of those buildings that are on the other side of King Street. And as Obi alluded to, we are making some changes to the design of this building. So we've added a large, it's hard to see, but there's another rendering I'll show later, a large amenity space on the top of this building, indoor amenity space. New facade treatments, Juliet balconies, larger windows, canopy treatments on the main floor, inserting commercial uses. And then we have this large commercial space in front of the parking structure, which will have spill-out space onto the public realm. So a completely different look and feel to this part of King Street than perhaps what we've seen in the past. In terms of the requests, Laura did go through them. I won't go through them exhaustively, but except to say that the setbacks that do relate to the parking deck, that parking deck is about 4 meters out of the ground. So it's not even as tall as a single detached house. So if you look at a 1 meter, it's 1 meter at its closest point, but it spreads to about 1.3 meters, which is a typical single detached setback. So it's not a very tall structure, it's a very short structure, and yes, it does have a reduced setback, but it's not a 25-story building with a 1 meter setback. It's a 1-story structure with a 1 meter setback. If we look at the new building, it meets the setback. It meets the side yard setback on the north side of 3 meters. It's when you combine this, if you combine the two buildings and you measured the setbacks from the two buildings, it would meet the bylaw. But because we have that raised parking structure, we need relief from the combined side yard. Similarly, the rear yard setback, most of it will apply to the parking deck because of the irregular shaped lot in this location. And we do need some relief for the tower, but the tower is articulated at the back, so the rear yard actually increases. It's only at its narrowest point where we need that relief down to 3.3 meters. And then a lot of these setbacks relate directly to the parking, the way we've designed the parking on the site. So this particular property is well served by active transportation and by some fairly very elaborate bus rapid transit. 2I express routes that could take you pretty much anywhere in Waterloo region are very accessible from this property, and we felt that a parking rate closer to what the city's proposing in their new bylaw was appropriate for this location. So we're proposing 86 parking spaces for the building, which, if we looked at the previous proposal, were about 20 parking spaces more than the previous site plan approval. So more parking, but fewer bedrooms. We are proposing that the car elevator provide access to the underground and above ground structure. It's an efficient way to design a building. There will be lots of other parking spaces that don't need the elevator, but there will be some that do. So we do need relief because the driveway doesn't lead directly to the parking. That's the reason why that ask is in there. Laura indicated that we were proposing to share the commercial and the residential parking. We're actually sharing the commercial and the visitor parking. The residential parking is 86 spaces separate, and then in addition to those, we have 6 parking spaces that would be shared between the commercial and visitors. So visitors who might be visiting people in the building or using the commercial uses. And then in terms of the landscape area, I just wanted to show Council again, even though the project today meets the 30% landscape and complies with the bylaw, it's not the highest quality of landscaping. And to be blunt, there are a number of projects along this stretch that met the bylaw to the T and provided 30% landscape, but they put it all around the perimeter, and it wasn't very useful landscaping. It didn't do anything for the streetscape, and it didn't do anything for the residents of the building. What we're doing here is we're focusing all of the landscape at grade, the outdoor landscaping, at the front of the building where it will be used by people who are visiting the building, people who are living in the building, and people who are coming and going from the commercial uses. So rather than strive for poor landscaping spread throughout the site, we've tried to go for less landscaping, but focusing it in the areas where it would be of most use. Some of the design considerations that we were looking at, so the building does have a fair bit of articulation, so we do actually punch the building out, which is why we were asked for that setback along King Street. So the new tower has portions of it set back and portions of it punched out towards King Street that are closer to the street. It has 2 prominent canopy treatments that actually have pillars that support the canopy to accentuate the entrance to the building, the commercial units, as well as the entrance to the residential building. And we're going to carry forward those canopy treatments into the renovations to the new building. Similarly, with the commercial space here, we have sort of a stepping of heights as we go across the site to give out, so it's not a blank, large, 60-meter wide building with a flat facade. It's 3 different structures that serve different functions and give you different things to look at as you're walking along the street. And then with the green and the orange show you the active commercial spaces as well as the active amenity spaces. So there's going to be amenity spaces in both buildings, inside and outside, as well as the commercial spaces to activate all 3 building frontages. So this rendering actually shows the amenity space that we're proposing to add to the new building. So as you're looking north, as you're coming up King Street, it's a very prominent glassed-in amenity space, which we hope will raise the elevation appearance from that side of the project. So we've submitted all the studies that the city staff have asked for. We understand Ms. Dewar and her team are reviewing them, and we look forward to getting her feedback. Just to wrap it up, I think we just want to reiterate that the project really is a reduction from what it was originally designed in terms of its number of bedrooms. So that's why the bonusing request seems so high. It meets the official plan in terms of its mixed use. It's well below the height that's permitted on this property. We feel that the retrofitting of the existing building could appeal to a broader demographic than today and will hopefully improve this portion of King Street. The activating of the street through the commercial uses, I think, not only will activate the street, but it will provide people who live in the neighborhood with places to go, places when they're walking, somewhere for them to visit, somewhere, a destination that they really don't have along this stretch right now. And we think that the new building is quite a bit more slender than the buildings that Council's seen on the other side of the street, and I think that makes a significant difference in terms of its appeal to the pedestrian eye. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Questions? Councillor Whaley first.
Thank you for your presentation, Trevor. Certainly a lot of new innovative ideas being rolled into one development. Especially intriguing is the elevator for parked cars. Interesting. With respect to the commercial space, we did hear that from the developer that condominium is the way you're thinking about in the building on the whole, but with respect to the commercial space itself, what do you contemplate in terms of use?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Whaley, we're using the official plan and the tentative RMU zoning. The city has a list of permitted uses in the RMU zone, draft 2 of the bylaw. We look forward to seeing draft 3 next week, of course, too. But that's our general guide in terms of what we would be looking for. We would only ask for what really the city's intending to permit in that zone. So it's a broad range for this type of use. It will allow restaurants, some retailing, as well as some other commercial services. So there's a fair number of good uses that would work quite well in this location.
And then I will ask my parking garage question. So you must have done some research into other parking garages, or maybe your team has done that before. Could you maybe fill us in a bit on how they might work? And you also said there's actually quite a few parking spaces that are just available on grade and stuff like that. So how many cars will require the elevator part?
Mayor Jaworski, there are a number of spaces under this building that don't require it. So when I come into the site, I come in here, there's a lay-by area here that can accommodate 2 vehicles that are waiting to access the elevator in this location. There's a gated entrance, so there's a light system on the elevator. If it's red, you can't go in, it's closed. That means somebody's coming from the underground or coming from the above ground structure. They then exit, and then the gate goes up, and you can pull in and access the elevator. So it works in a sort of like a railroad crossing. The gate's down, you can't go. The gate goes up, you can. So the idea is that rather than using up half of the property in terms of building ramps, you're making a much more efficient use of the property and wasting less of it on asphalt.
Did I hear you correctly that the elevator only needs to go down?
The elevator goes down to the underground parking, which is underneath most of the site.
Yeah.
The elevator goes up to this deck here, which has about 12 or 15 spaces.
And how many floors of deck are there that has to go up?
Just
to
that one.
Okay.
There's a bunch of parking under this building, which doesn't need the elevator, and under this building, which doesn't need the elevator. And these spaces at the back that you can see also do not need the elevator.
Thank you. Seeing none. Thank you, Trevor. And is there anyone here present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Those were the end of my other ones. Anyone here present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you. Next up.